Okay, so welcome back. Today we're going to show you how to write a very simple application that will allow you to back up or synchronize files and folders from one place on your computer to another place on your computer, maybe to a different drive, or to a different computer altogether on the same network. And this is great if you got important files you want to back up. Fairly simple application, and you can run it every hour, every day, every week, whatever you want. And you can see here I've got two file explorers open here. On the top I've got the folder that I want to back up, all of the files and folders inside that folder. I want to back that up, and on the bottom you can see another file explorer for another computer altogether. It's a laptop that I've got on the same network. And I want to back all those files and folders up to another folder, a shared folder on that other computer. And I set it up to do it every day, and it's basically going to run the application that we're going to develop, and it's going to say, hey, here's the files and folders. Do they already exist on the other computer? If not, I'm going to copy them over, and it's also going to decide, hey, if the same files and folders exist, are the ones on the main computer newer? If so, I want to copy them over and keep everything up to date on the backup computer. So I've got our application scheduled to run, so we should see this copy over files in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And there you go. The application immediately detected that those files don't exist in the what's called the target folder on the other computer. And if they did exist, it would also check to see if the source files are newer. And if they are, it would just copy them over and overwrite the files in the target. So let's take a look at how we might do this. It seems like a fairly simple procedure, but it turns out there are some things that you probably haven't thought of that we need to consider. So let's see how we can put something together that will work. Well, you might think that this is a really simple task. Just copy some files and folders to another hard drive or another directory and you're all set. And if you're like the typical hobbyist or newbie, you're just going to jump in and start writing code. But I pretty much guarantee if you do that, you're going to wish you didn't. You're going to get to a point where you say, oh, I never thought of that. And there's multiple things in this task that you're going to realize later on that are going to lead you into a rat's nest and you wish you thought about it first. So what we're going to do is what we normally do in our videos is we're going to start by designing it first. Think about what we need to do, and from that we can generate code a whole lot easier and a lot more efficiently. So one of the better ways to start the design process is to actually write down what you're trying to accomplish. And what I've done here is I've written one sentence that pretty much summarizes what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to synchronize files, which means any new or updated source files will be copied to a target directory. So now what we can do is we can take that sentence and we can break it down into the components and figure out for each component, how do I write code for it? So we're going to have to figure out what is new, what does updated mean, what are source files, how to copy, and what's a target directory. So new, what does that mean? Well, it means that it doesn't exist in the target directory. So we're going to have to write some code to figure out if files and folders exist in whatever the target directory is. And we're going to have to figure out what are updated. What does that mean? Well, that means that the source date of a file or folder is newer than the target. So we're going to have to figure out some way to determine what file is newer than the other file. So what would that be? If you think about it, hopefully there is a file property that tells you the last time it was updated. If not, maybe you can find a property that says the last time it was written to disk or whatever. Then we're going to have to figure out source files. We're going to have to define the source folder and iterate through each file to see what's there so that we can know that we have to copy them or not. And then copied, we're going to have to figure out how we can copy files not only to another directory on the same computer or the same hard drive, but also how to copy files to other computers on the network. And we recently did a video showing how to do that. And then target directory, we have to make sure if we're going to copy files from certain folders on the source directory, we're going to have to match that file path and folders to the target directory. So for example, if I'm copying from the D documents source directory and I'm copying a folder called subfolder that has a file called test.txt, I need to kind of rename that, remap it to this target directory that might be e-text files. So we're going to have to figure out, here's our source directory, but what do we need to do to convert that to a target directory? And we're going to have to do something similar with folders. That was all files. How are we going to handle folders? So we're going to say any new source folders, we don't care if it's an updated source folder, any new source folders will be copied to a target directory. So we have to do the exact same logic for the folders. So now we've got files and we got folders we have to consider. So for example, if we have our source folder path that looks like this, D documents code library, and we want to copy, we want to back up everything in C# classes subdirectory 1, we have to figure out how to come up with the desired target folder path, which is going to look like this, D documents sync test, and this is the new folder and subfolder that we're going to have to add. So how are we going to do that? Well, what we're going to have to do is maybe some string parsing where we're going to remove the source folder path and just take the updated folder path, do some string parsing with the target folder path, and append that to the target folder path. So we're going to have to figure out a way to do that. And then we're going to have to do recursion. So what does that mean? Well, maybe in our source, our main directory, we're going to have to first get a list of subdirectories to see what's there so we know whether we need to copy them over or not. So we're going to have to find some way for a directory to find the list of subdirectories. In this case, hopefully we'll find these two subdirectories, but then we're going to have to go to these and see if there are other subdirectories below them. So we're going to go to this subdirectory and say, hey, give me a list of the subdirectories. In this case, there are none. So then we'll go to the next one and say, hey, do you have any subdirectories? And the response will be, yes, we've got this one subdirectory. Then we'll have to recursively go to that subdirectory and say, hey, do you have any subdirectories? So we're going to have to figure out some way to do this recursion to make sure that we've got all of the subdirectories and sub-subdirectories and so on. So we can imagine we might have a method that looks kind of like this, where the method is update directories. And the first thing we do is we say, hey, for this directory, give me a list of subdirectories. And then for each directory in subdirectories, we can call this method again. We can recursively call the method to say, okay, now that we've got the subdirectory, get a list of sub-subdirectories. And then for each directory, recursively go back and run this method again. So synchronizing pseudocode to convert all of these components to code, we're going to have to first define the source directory, define the target directory, scan the source directory, and then for each file in the source, determine if the same file exists in the target. If it doesn't, we're going to copy from source to target. If it does, determine if the source file is newer than the target. If it is, copy from source to target. And keep in mind, that's just for the files. We're going to have to do the same for the folders. So we can imagine we might need some methods, which is get target path, and then update the target directories and update the target files. So that's kind of the structure of what we're going to use in our application. Now, the other thing we might want to consider is what are called rules. You may have just one directory that you want to update to the backup location, but you may have many. You may have like, okay, I want to back up this folder, and also I want to back up this folder, and you may have 10 folders you want to back up to different paths in the target. So we can define what are called rules, where we can say, hey, what is the source file path for this rule? What is the target file path? And then we can also have some options. Maybe we don't want to just automatically just copy them over. Maybe we want to copy them over, but also delete any target files that don't exist in the source so that the target matches exactly what's in the source and we don't want any other files hanging around. Or we can only operate on certain file types. So we can specify a lot in these rules what we want to do. And then what we can do, we can also say, hey, I want to know the results. This is going to be happening in the background, so maybe I can keep like a log of results. Was it successful? if it's doing it in the background, we don't have any user interface, maybe we want a log that says, hey, this didn't work, so you need to do something. Maybe we want to know the elapsed time to see if it's taking a long time, how many files you've operated on, and so on. You can imagine you might want to have some source of data defining different rules with all of this information for each rule and give you a lot of ways to customize your different rules. So we have to think about that when we're implementing this. Another thing we need to consider is the implementation. How often do we want to run the backup? Every day, every week, every month? And then how will we run our app on that schedule? Say you want to do it every day, week, or month. How are we going to run it? Do we want to use the internal system timer, a C# application? We talked in a previous video leading up to this that there is a Windows task scheduler that we can say, hey, here's my application. Run it every day, week, and month, and do it in the background. I don't have any UI, just go do it, and let me know if there's any problems. And then we need to figure out, how do we get user input? So for example, for the different rules, we have to have the user tell us for each rule, what is all this data for the rules? Where are we going to do that? We're going to have a UI, or we're going to have a text or CSV file. So we got to figure out how we're going to get user input. And then, like we said, do we want to log the results? So these are the things we have to consider in our application to get this going the way we want. So now here is our very simple C# console application in Visual Studio. Now we're not going to use a UI application. We're not going to use a Windows Forms application. Instead, we are just going to have the user specify the rules in an external CSV file that looks like this, where each line represents one rule. And I've got, in this case, the source path is this string with a comma, and the target path is this other string. In this case, I'm saying back up everything in code library on this computer and copy it to the HP laptop, which is on the local area network, and back it up to the test folder. And the second rule is to back up this folder, scope traces, to another drive on this computer with this path. So I've got two rules. All I've got is the source and the target. You can add a bunch more stuff as we talked about, but this is really the user input rather than a UI. And this is the simple application. And you can see I've got some using statements. I've got my main console application program, and I am saying the rules path, the path to this CSV file with the rules in it is this. And then I'm also setting up a log path where I'm taking the log data that we talked about and saving that to a separate text file. And here I've got a list of rules. Now, what is this list of rules? Well, we talked about how the rules can get kind of complicated and there can be a lot of data associated with each rule. So what I've decided is to add, right-click, add new class. And I've set up a public class rule class. And all it does is it holds the properties for each rule. So I can instantiate a rule after I read it in from this CSV file, and I can fill in these properties. I've got integer rule number. You may not need that. I've got the string source path that I get from the CSV file. I've got the string target path. I've also got a time span, so I can figure out the elapsed time that all this takes to accomplish. Also, I can keep track of how many new folders were generated in the target, how many new files were generated in the target, and how many files in the target were overwritten with newer files. Now you can add to this, you can subtract from it, but this is just a nice way to store all the rules data for each rule. So I've got a list of rules that we can use to do our updating. And that's about it. We've got our main application, and all I'm doing is I'm first running a method that gets those rules from the file and populates all these rules with all that data. And then for each rule, I am first taking, for that particular rule, I'm taking the source path string property in that rule and applying it to this directory info that will return to us information about the source path directory. So then we can go through and we can look at the subdirectories and so on. So this directory info returns the source folder, which is the directory info object, and then we can use that to go through and get all these subfolders and the files. And then I'm just instantiating a stopwatch so I can figure out how long this takes, and I'm starting the stopwatch. And here I'm doing the basic backup. I'm running an update target directories, and I'm feeding it the rule that we have brought in, and also the source folder that we're going to be working on. And I've got an update target files with the rule and the source folder. So we're taking care of the target directories. Any new target directories will be copied over. Any new or updated target files will be copied over. And once we're done, we'll stop the stopwatch and get an elapsed time and populate for that particular rule the elapsed time that we can get later. And then I can do a save to log file is a method we're going to generate with that rule, and it's basically going to populate the elapsed time, the number of new folders, new files, and so on. So that's about the application. I think in the next video we'll start to look at the core of this, the methods that get the rules, update the files, and so on, and see how we can implement all this. So that's about it for this one. If you like any of these videos, I encourage you to hit the like button, subscribe, hit the bell notifications. But most of all, please let others know that we're here so we get some views. Really appreciate it. Otherwise, take care. Have a really good day. Thanks.